broke out on your watch. What's your take on it after 3.5 years? And what do you say to those who say, look, we inherited a flawed order in the Middle East, and what we've helped bring about is an even more flawed disorder?
Well, I think there is some truth to that, but it's not the whole picture by any means. And it's probably, this is always an escape hatch for anybody asked a question like this. It's probably too soon to tell, but I can certainly share my observations and experiences. If you compare the different places where this occurred, there are different reasons why maybe not as much progress has happened as we would have liked, but there are some commonalities. Take Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. Very different settings for the Arab Spring. Tunisia, which had a middle class, basically, lots of poverty, lots of wealth, but they had a solid middle class. They had laws which enshrined equality for women in Tunisia. They had an Islamist movement, but it was not extreme. It was much more based in an intellectual, if you will, approach to using Islam as an organizing principle for a new state post Ben Ali. And they've had a rocky, but I would argue successful transition. Now, they still have to make it sustainable. They've got a constitution which has been agreed to by all the different parties. They've changed governments a few times, and it's been peaceful. So a lot of observers are looking at Tunisia to see how they manage moving forward. Compare that, of course, with Libya, where the 42-year of rule of Gaddafi hollowed out the country, hollowed out the institutions, drove into exile people who could have contributed post-revolution. When Gaddafi fell and the revolution was successful, there were some very promising early signs. That first election was well done, carried out according to international standards, and the winners were largely moderate secularists. And then what happened is when you can't perform the most basic function of a state, in other words, provide security, you're going to have all those tribes who had allied themselves predominantly with the rebels trying to figure out what's in it for them. And I've met some of them. And they were united by their hatred of Gaddafi, but little else. And so now there's an effort to try to assert state security over this range of militias and tribal organizations. So the jury is out. We don't know. It's a rich country. It has the resources. If it can get itself organized, it's supposed to have an election toward the end of this month. We'll watch. Compare that to Egypt. The revolution in Egypt was leaderless. It truly was run by young people. They were motivated and organized through social media, but they were not political. And when I went to Egypt shortly after the fall of Mubarak, I met with several dozen leaders, so-called leaders of the Tahrir Square revolution. And I asked them, I said, well, so who's going to run for office if there are elections? Well, we don't do that. Well, who's going to organize a political party? That's not our job. Our job was to protest, demonstrate, and bring down the dictator. I said, well, you realize there are only two organized forces in Egypt, the military and the Muslim Brotherhood. Oh no, others will rise up. There will be an election that will validate the revolution. I was pessimistic and I think realistic. We had quite a exchange, some have called it a shouting match, because I was just appalled that there was no political element to this revolution. Fast forward, we went through the Muslim Brotherhood, we went through the uprising orchestrated by the military to remove the Muslim Brotherhood, and now the military is back. And Egypt faces an enormous amount of internal opposition and I think extremism, so we'll watch. We'll see how that
But given
unfolds.
what you just said, did we not, maybe should we have been a bit slower in our haste to push out Mr. Mubarak? You mentioned in the book your concerns about that and your support for some of what Frank Wisner was trying to do. Or in the case of Libya, if we were going to participate in the ousting of Gaddafi, ought not we have been prepared to have done more and the follow-up, almost Colin Powell's rule about Pottery Barn. We helped break it, but we didn't really help put it back together.
Well, on Libya first, that's not accurate. We did try. We tried very hard to help them secure their borders, to help them follow our advice along with our European and some of our Arab colleagues in the action against Gaddafi, to begin to assert security. That is a perfect case where people who've never had that opportunity to run anything, manage anything, even participate in meaningful politics, understandably are not even sure what questions to ask, let alone what answers to take. There was reluctance to accept too much Western help. And we did accomplish a couple of very good objectives. We removed some of the stockpiles of WMD. We got some important work done, but not near enough. And we're still at it. We're still trying to work with whoever is going to be in the government. On Egypt, you're right. I detail in the book, I had a lot of apprehension about just throwing Mubarak out of office, not knowing what was going to come next, or not helping to prepare a more orderly transition. And I was the one who suggested, along with Bill Burns, that we send Frank Wisner, who knew Mubarak well. I also called the Sultan of Oman, who knew him well. I was trying to urge other voices to tell Mubarak to move more quickly to demonstrate, number one, he would not run again. Number two, his son would not run again. Number three, there would be a process of inclusive consultation that could lead to reform. We couldn't persuade him to do that. And at a certain point, the president and other leaders spoke out and said he had to go. But I remained apprehensive about what would follow.
You described